Now, welcome to part 10 of my alternate version of Revenge of the Sith and the ending of the Clone Wars, where things are playing out differently this time, thanks in large part to Ahsoka never having left the Jedi Order, and instead she and Fives begin to unravel the mystery of the Sith and the true purpose of the Clone Army. And very quickly, before getting back to it, just let me say that if you're someone new to this series, I would highly recommend starting at part 1, and if you enjoy it, eventually working your way back to this part. Otherwise, everything going on right now in this story likely won't make any sense to you whatsoever. A link to the playlist can be found in the comments and description below. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We find ourselves over the planet Coruscant and aboard a Republic cruiser, where we're in the hangar bay and see numerous gunships being prepped, as well as it being packed with a great many clone troopers, several thousand by the looks of it. And some of these troopers wear the new Phase 3 helmets and armor with yellow trim, indicating them to be from Obi-Wan's 212th Battalion, and others wear the older Phase 2 helmets and stark white armor, other than blue fives painted on each shoulder, indicating them as part of the already and aptly named 555th Clone Legion, under the command of General Attain Turmucken, and recently promoted Commander Fives. And by the fact that all is calm in the hangar, for the most part, we can clearly tell we're at some point, and probably very shortly before, the surprise separatist attack we saw at the end of the last episode. And so now we see walking together and amongst all the clones, as if they're performing a final inspection perhaps, is both Attain and Fives, and they're constantly being saluted by each of the clones that they pass. And as we focus in on the two of them, we see Attain lean over and say quietly to Fives, "Why do I feel like they're saluting you and not me?" Fives, who has his Phase 3 helmet off and tucked under his arm, stops, turns to her, and says, "No offense, General, but they've heard this is your first command and your first battle of the war. That makes them a bit uneasy." Attain also stops, looks at Fives, and studies him for a moment before responding, "Strange then that I sense more unease from you than any of them, and this is also their first battle, but hardly yours." Fives replies, "Maybe that's why I'm so nervous. I know exactly what they're in for, and I know for many of them, their first battle will be their last." To that, though, Attain shakes her head and says, "No, something else is troubling you. Something else has been troubling you for the last few days, since right away when we first met, there's been something just eating away at you." For a moment then, Fives glances around and we see him look at all the troopers surrounding him, and more specifically, he seems to be looking at the helmets they wear, the Phase 2 helmets. He then turns back to Attain, and for a second it looks like he's just going to blurt out and tell her everything that he knows. But instead he says, "Can I ask you something, General? Why have you stayed away from the war until now?" Attain says back, "Fighting a war isn't the reason I became a Jedi. You could almost say it's the opposite reason." Fives then nods as if he understands, but then says with something like a sad, ironic smile on his face, "For me, well, I was made to fight this war. Programmed to fight it even. Not only was I never given a choice, but I was created to not want to have a choice, created to want nothing more than to fight and die if need be, side by side with my brothers." Fives again takes a moment to glance all around him before finishing, "But right now, fighting is the last thing I want for any of us." As if instinctually, Attain reaches out her hand and places it on and takes hold of Fives' forearm as she offers him not so much a look of sympathy, but one of genuine care and concern. The two then lock eyes, and that look lingers for a moment, before she lets go and the two awkwardly shift positions and look away. Both are about to hastily say something, when an explosion rocks the ship. Which is when we're taken up to the bridge and see Obi-Wan Kenobi staring out the front viewport in horrified awe at countless separatist ships, and more coming out of hyperspace every second. He then calls out, "Recall the fleet, we need every ship back here now." A moment later, an officer calls back, "They're somehow jamming all transmissions, sir. We can't get anything out." We see Obi-Wan thinking for a moment before saying, "Then we need to get word of this attack to them another way. Get a ship, any ship, out of range of their jamming so they can get a message out into the fleet." But the Admiral standing nearby only shakes his head and says, "Nothing would get past that blockade they're setting up." The look on Obi-Wan's face says he agrees, but he says anyway, "Well, it's the only chance we've got." He then lets out a long sigh and says as if he knows he's sending many to their death, "Launch all our fighters. Launch every ship we've got and tell them to try and make the jump to hyperspace or get far enough away to get a message to the fleet." The Admiral then fires back, "Doing so would leave us almost completely defenseless against their fighters." But Obi-Wan responds, again looking at the massive fleet of Separatist ships. "Our fighters won't make much of a difference against that anyway, Admiral. Nothing will if we don't get our fleet back here as soon as possible. And even then, I don't know." Obi-Wan then falls silent and gives a slight, ominous shake of the head, while the Admiral too falls silent, seeming to reluctantly agree. Which is when we're taken aboard the bridge of the lead Separatist ship and see General Grievous staring out his front viewport at the 8 or so Republic cruisers his massive fleet is now engulfing and pummeling, as well as the planet Coruscant beyond and below, which is where his real focus seems to lie. And as he eagerly stares at it, a tactical droid approaches and says, "We have taken them completely by surprise. I estimate our odds of total victory to be over 99%. To that, General Grievous lets out a long, joyous, mechanical laugh before saying, "Finish off the Republic cruisers and then begin bombardment of the planet. Nothing can stop us now." That's when we're taken across the galaxy to Dagobah and down into the cave where Anakin and Ahsoka are having a shared vision of the planet Mustafar, one where a devious and evil illusion of Obi-Wan Kenobi has essentially baited them into fighting each other, and that image of Obi-Wan along with Ahsoka each wield a crimson red lightsaber, one half of Maul's double-bladed saber, and are braced for the charging Anakin, who wields his usual blue saber. "We'll take 'em together," we hear Obi-Wan say quietly to Ahsoka, not taking his eyes off Anakin. Ahsoka then glances at Obi-Wan, and for a brief instant we see a mixture of hesitation and confusion on her face, as if she can't quite figure out why or how exactly it's gotten to this point. But before she can think on it too much, she watches as Anakin reaches and swings angrily at Obi-Wan, all but ignoring her. And for a few seconds then, all Ahsoka does is watch as Anakin swings again and again, forcing Obi-Wan back and on the complete defensive. Finally, though, she springs into action, leaping beside Obi-Wan and blocking one of Anakin's fierce attacks, giving Kenobi a crucial moment to sort of catch his breath and reestablish himself a bit. Anakin then glances at Ahsoka and says through gritted teeth, "How could you betray me too?" Ahsoka gives him an incredulous look and says, "Betray you? You're the one who joined with Dooku, who wants to defeat Sidious so you can, rule a galaxy together?" Anakin shakes his head, and it seems as if some of the rage subsides just a bit as he begins to say, No, you don't understand. I would never betray you. I joined with him because..." But it's then that Obi-Wan takes a swing at Anakin, forcing him to quickly block and cutting off what he was saying. Obi-Wan then says to Ahsoka, "Don't listen to him, Ahsoka. Don't trust him. Don't trust a word he says." And though we initially see a bit of doubt and confusion again on her face, Ahsoka nevertheless nods, looks resolute, and along with Obi-Wan they begin to press the attack together and to start to drive Anakin back and towards the nearby lava river. And it's as Anakin is on the defensive that he says, looking mainly at Ahsoka, "My allegiance has always been to the Jedi, to the Republic, to democracy." But Ahsoka quickly snaps back, "No, it hasn't. Your allegiance has never been to the Jedi. It's always been to yourself, to what you want. Did you honestly think I didn't know about you and Padme all this time?" Hearing that seems to distract Anakin just a bit, just enough, and Obi-Wan lands a glancing blow on his arm, causing Anakin to cry out in pain, which then causes Ahsoka to hesitate to stop attacking, but not Obi-Wan. As he continues, it's almost as if he makes up for Ahsoka's hesitation by doubling the intensity of his own attack. We then switch to the perspective of Anakin, meaning it's unlikely Ahsoka is even hearing this, and we hear Obi-Wan say to him, "You can't beat me, Anakin, not like this, not without fully embracing the dark side. It's the only way you can win, the only way you can have everything you want." Obi-Wan then smiles wickedly and continues, "And if you don't stop me, I promise you Padme will suffer. The last thing you'll ever feel is her pain." Anakin then shakes his head and cries out as he begins to counterattack, No, I won't let you hurt her. I'll do whatever I have to protect her." Obi-Wan then says, "Then embrace the dark side and have it all, Anakin. Have all the power you crave, all the people you love, and have the galaxy the way you envision it. It can all be yours, Anakin." Ahsoka then, who didn't hear any of what Obi-Wan said to Anakin, seems slightly confused by all this, almost seems to think Anakin is responding to her, as she watches Anakin now begin to turn the tables back in his favor, and to force Obi-Wan back on the defensive. And so once again Ahsoka sprints forward and joins in, blocking an attack and giving Obi-Wan yet another momentary respite. But this time when she does it, Anakin, almost without thought because of all the anger within him, swings at Ahsoka, just narrowly missing her throat. The two then lock eyes as if neither believes what just happened or what almost just happened. And then for the briefest of moments where Ahsoka is standing, Anakin now sees Padme, and he sees her clutching at her throat as if being force-choked and trying to say, "Anakin, no." That's when Obi-Wan seizes the opportunity and swings at the distracted Anakin and hits him on the same arm as he did before, but this time causing it to fall limp and hang at his side. Obi-Wan then says to Ahsoka as Anakin raises his saber with the one good arm and hand he has left, ready to block whatever comes next. "He's lost, Ahsoka. We have to end this quickly. End it before he fully embraces the dark side. You were shown what his future holds. You saw that it's always been his destiny to fall and bring darkness to the galaxy." Anakin, though, quickly shakes his head, looking at Ahsoka with pleading eyes, tears welling up in them over what he almost just did. But from her perspective, she can only see hate and anger in his yellow-tinged eyes. "I would never hurt you," Anakin then says, in a way that very much conflicts with what Ahsoka is seeing on his face. "I would never hurt the ones I care about. They're all that matter to me." Before Anakin can say more, though, Obi-Wan again attacks and starts to drive him back and down the gently sloping rocky bank and towards the nearby lava river. And this time Obi-Wan's attacks come almost unnaturally fast and aggressive, and it's taking Anakin all he has, all his energy, all he's got to block them, especially with only one good arm. And all the while Ahsoka looks on with doubt on her face. But it's hard to know just what she's doubting at the moment. In no time then, it looks like Anakin has been reduced to the point where at any moment his defenses could slip and where Obi-Wan could land a killing blow, which is very much what it seems Kenobi is going for. That's when Anakin shouts in the direction of Ahsoka, "I told you I'd never turn on you. Never! Because you're right about me. You were right. I've always cared more about the people I love than being a Jedi. I've always put them first. I failed as a Jedi." After hearing that, Ahsoka shuts her eyes painfully and lowers her head. And when she again finally opens them and looks up, all that anger and hate that she saw on Anakin's face is gone. Nevertheless, there is still some doubt on her face as she begins to say, "I believed in you, Anakin. I always believed in you. Just like you always believed in me." We see Ahsoka get lost in her thoughts for a moment, lost in her memory, and as she continues, any trace of the doubt that was on her face fades away. "Even when the rest of the Jedi turned on me, you didn't. Even when I stopped believing in myself, you didn't." It's then that Obi-Wan's attacks suddenly, albeit briefly, come to a halt, and he says over his shoulder to Ahsoka, "Don't falter now, Ahsoka. Don't let his words get to you. It's all a trick. He has fallen to the dark side." And with that said, Obi-Wan again attacks. But now Anakin has nowhere left to fall back to, for he's very near the lava river. But to all of that said by Obi-Wan, Ahsoka only shakes her head and says to herself, "No, I can't stop believing in him now. I can't stop believing in something, in having faith in something. The Jedi may have failed me, but I will not fail them. Because I am a Jedi." Ahsoka then raises the lightsaber, the one half of Maul's lightsaber, but no longer is the blade red. Instead, it now glows white. And it's also at this moment that the last of Anakin's strength seems to give out, and his saber hand drops to his side. Obi-Wan, sensing victory, only smiles and slowly draws back his own red saber. Anakin, seeing Obi-Wan do this, then, with the one good hand and arm he has left, raises his saber up, holding it perpendicular to the ground out in front of him and in front of his face. He then shuts his eyes and says, "I will not fight you. I will not let my anger win. And if you strike me down, I will join with the Force. I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." Obi-Wan then swings like he's going to cut him in half at the midsection, but Ahsoka gets there just in time to block. And before Obi-Wan can even react, she flips over him, taking the high ground above him on the rocky bank, and she then draws her hand back and simply force pushes Kenobi, and he drops the saber he was wielding, the one that belonged to Maul, and he goes flying back into the lava river and disappears. Anakin then opens his eyes and seems pleasantly surprised to still be alive before just collapsing to the ground. Ahsoka then rushes to his side, and he says to her, You saved me, Snips." But she quickly says back, "And you saved me too, Sky Guy." To that, Anakin smiles, but it quickly fades away as he says with a grim expression suddenly on his face, "I have to choose, don't I? Or the ones I love will always be used against me. They'll always be made to suffer. I have to pick either a Jedi or..." Ahsoka only nods at him, and so Anakin sighs and shuts his eyes tight for a moment. But when he opens them, he looks all around and says, What exactly did happen to Obi-Wan anyway?" Ahsoka motions with her head towards the lava river. Anakin then says with a half grin on his face, "I sure hope that wasn't the real Obi-Wan then." Ahsoka can't help but smile and laugh herself as she says, "I'm pretty sure it wasn't." We then move to somewhere else in the cave, to what looks like a gazebo on Naboo, where Count Dooku just witnessed Maul stab a different illusion of Obi-Wan through the stomach, which has now led the two to about to engage in a saber duel, as Dooku has already drawn and ignited his crimson red saber, and Maul stands there wielding a green one that looks like the saber that once belonged to Qui-Gon Jinn. And now we watch as the two slowly circle each other from across the room, the body of the fake Obi-Wan laying motionless in the center of the room, where the funeral pyre of Qui-Gon Jinn once was. And we hear Dooku say, "You would be wise to stand down, for you stand little chance against me. Your problem is you rely entirely on your rage, and lack any real skill with a saber." Maul then snarls before doing a quick and impressive flourish with his saber, and then flips at Dooku and unleashes a series of quick, fluent attacks that look so precise and perfect, and are perfectly blocked by Dooku, that the whole exchange looks almost like it had to be choreographed. When the two separate again, Dooku smiles and looks like he's about to deliver another snide remark, when he realizes that a part of his cape has been sliced away and has fallen to the floor. "You were saying?" Maul then says as Dooku's smile fades away. Maul then continues, "If boasting could defeat Sidious, I believe you long ago would have become the Master Sith. But you lack what it would truly take to ever defeat him, to ever rise above him." The two then again have a brief, albeit impressive looking lightsaber exchange that accomplishes nothing, where neither seems like they can get the advantage on the other, before they separate once more and begin to again slowly circle each other. Dooku then says with a slightly impressed look on his face, "Perhaps you do possess some skill after all." And to that Maul replies, "And within you I do sense rage, a great deal of rage which you try so very hard to control." Dooku's look then darkens a bit as he says while raising his saber, "And it was you who gave birth to that rage when you killed my apprentice." It's then Dooku's turn to quickly move towards and attack Maul, but after yet another impressive looking exchange, they both again separate and begin to circle, which is when Maul says, "No, I think not. The death of your apprentice only set free the anger that was always there, and then Sidious sensed it, took advantage of it, used you." Maul's mind then seems to wander a bit, and he says more to himself than anything, "Has he used me? Has he took advantage of my fear of him?" Dooku then casts a look of pity upon Maul as he watches him continue to talk to himself, and Dooku then says, "How very little you understand. It's no wonder you were so quickly discarded by Sidious. All I have ever done was in an effort to..." But Maul cuts him off and finishes for him in a mocking tone, "All you have ever done was in an effort to save the galaxy." Maul then chuckles, and it's his turn to offer something like a look of pity to Dooku as he continues, "But that's not entirely true, is it? Because being the one to actually save it was always more important to you than it actually being saved." Dooku's expression twists into anger, which causes Maul to smile as he continues, "So much pride. That is your downfall. That is what Sidious exploited. All that rage you draw on is your inability to cope with your own failures, not anything I took from you." Maul then almost seems surprised by his own words, as if he doesn't even know where that all came from. Regardless, Dooku, quivering with anger, raises his hand and unleashes Force lightning at Maul, and Maul uses his saber to deflect it, sending it streaking up towards the center of the ceiling, which blows apart not only the roof, but most of the stone gazebo, and sends debris raining down on both of them. Next, we know we're back in the Dagobah cave itself, in the murky darkness, where we see a confused Count Dooku standing there, wondering how he got back here when last he knew he was about to be crushed by falling stones. But before he can worry too much about it, he hears something behind him and turns around to see a hazy, ghostly blue image of Qui-Gon Jinn that quickly says to him, "You once told me that those who serve the dark always seek to prove their strength in order to rule others, while those who serve the light seek only humility so that they may serve others." Dooku then says back, "And what is this now? Another trick of this place?" The image of Qui-Gon shakes his head. "No, it is truly me, my old friend and master. But I have very little time, just enough to remind you of one of the most valuable lessons you ever taught me. Dooku, by the look on his face, clearly isn't trusting this entirely, but he gives a slight nod of the head anyway, as if telling him to continue. And so the image of Qui-Gon Jinn does just that, and says, "The darkness is not stronger than the light, but it can offer great power to an individual, but only an individual. There can only ever be one to wield the full strength of the dark side, as Sidious does now. For by its very nature it thrives off fear and division. It is at its most potent when one stands alone, and the many cower before them. This is why the light can be stronger, for by its very nature the light brings people together. It is unity, it is harmony, it is balance. The light is at its strongest when the many stand together. And this is why the Jedi have always prevailed over the Sith. For the Sith will always fight amongst themselves for the power to be the one, while the true Jedi will always unite for the betterment of all, to be the many." Without another word, the image of Qui-Gon Jinn then fades away, and Dooku is left alone in the darkness to think. Which is when we're taken to another part of the dark and damp cave, and see Maul standing there just as confused as Dooku was, for he too was about to be crushed by falling stones again. He then hears a noise behind him, and turns and also sees the hazy blue image of Qui-Gon Jinn standing there behind him, and Maul quickly says, "What trick is this now? You're dead, I killed you." To that Qui-Gon nods and replies, "You did, and by doing so you changed what was meant to be. And now Sidious is on the verge of victory, on the verge of conquering all. Thanks to you, thanks to what you did for him." Maul quickly snaps back, "You blame this all on me? He only ever used me. You think I don't know that? You think I don't know I was nothing to him?" Qui-Gon shakes his head and responds, "No, I think you know all too well the futility of the dark side. But now you need to learn forgiveness." Maul then looks both angry and incredulous as he says, "Forgiveness? Forgiveness? You expect me to forgive Sidious?" But Qui-Gon cuts him off, and as he begins to fade away, he says, "No, I expect you to find forgiveness for yourself, for not being strong enough to face him alone then, but to be strong enough to face him with others now, and not for your own sake, not to rise to power for yourself, but to make right all that you have made wrong. And in doing this, you will find that which you have always sought. You will find freedom." And with those words, Qui-Gon completely vanishes, and Maul is left alone in the darkness to think. Which is when we're taken back to Coruscant above the planet, where we see the 8 Republic cruisers from before surrounded by and being shredded by laser fire from the massive Separatist fleet. We also see plenty of individual Republic ships and fighters, all trying to simply get far enough away to either get out of range of the jamming or to make the jump to hyperspace so that they can get word out about what's happening here to the rest of the fleet. But every fighter and other ship we see is being swarmed and quickly destroyed by vulture droids and other Separatist ships and fighters. All around, it's nothing short of a massacre, which is exactly what the Admiral tells Obi-Wan as we're taken back into the bridge of their cruiser, a cruiser that is constantly being rocked by laser fire and likely won't last much longer. We then hear Obi-Wan ask to anyone in the general vicinity who can answer, "Have any ships gotten through? Has anyone gotten word out to the fleet?" One of the bridge officers simply shakes his head no. There is then a long moment of ominous silence before there is a massive explosion that rocks the ship so bad some on the bridge lose their balance and fall over, and we hear someone yell out that they've lost their primary engines. It's in the next moment that a different bridge officer says, "Sir, we may have something." That officer then hits a button on his computer terminal, and we hear a voice echo throughout the bridge and say, "This is Oddball. Me and the boys are going to make a run at this. Would appreciate any cover you can give us." Obi-Wan briefly smiles, then yells out for them to do just that. For all cruisers, all ships, everyone and anyone to give them cover. Another officer yells out that they have no engines, but Obi-Wan only shakes his head and says to still do whatever they can. Which is when we're taken back to Dagobah, to just outside the cave where Yoda stands leaning heavily upon his cane, when suddenly walking up out of it, side by side, we see Anakin and Ahsoka. They both then walk up to Yoda and all but collapse to the ground in front of him. "Decisions you have both made." Both Anakin and Ahsoka nod. Yoda then focuses in on Anakin. "Ready you are to face your destiny. Ready are you to truly embrace the Jedi way?" Anakin hesitates briefly, shuts his eyes tight, but then nods his head. After his eyes again open, Anakin then asks, "And what about Dooku? Has he come out yet?" "And Maul, what about him?" Ahsoka adds, which gets a bit of a look and a frown from Anakin, but he seems to quickly let it go. All Yoda does then is motion with his head and cane towards the cave entrance, where first Dooku emerges, and then a few long moments later is Maul. And both walk in their direction, and for a long moment, they all just wordlessly stand there, none of them seeming to want to look at each other, or perhaps knowing exactly what to say to each other after all they've been through. And it's at that very moment, as if destined, that the Jedi communicators on Ahsoka and Yoda's wrists go off, and they all hear a faint voice and message. "This is CC-2237, relaying a message to any and all Republic forces from General Obi-Wan Kenobi. Coruscant is under attack and needs immediate help. And if you're hearing this, you may be our only hope." Ahsoka and Anakin then get to their feet, and then all four of them, Dooku, Maul, Anakin, and Ahsoka, all exchange looks but say nothing. Yet somehow we know they're all thinking the exact same thing. They all know the time for the final battle has come. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part and what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.